So this is the third part of chapter 19. I am going to talk about symbiosis. So there's different types of interactions between species: competition, predation, mutualism, and commensalism. So this is between two species. So in competition, both species have a net loss. Predation, the predator obviously is a positive, and the prey gets eaten, so he's a negative. Mutualism is when both species benefit, and commensalism is with one species benefits and the other one is not affected. So the first one I'm going to do is competition. I'm going to spend more time on competition than the other three. So competition is a contest between organisms, populations, or different species. So interspecific is between two different species. So here it looks like the little prairie dog and the bird are competing for the nut or whatever they're eating. And here the hyenas and the lions are competing for food here. So that is interspecific competition. Is between two different species. And then intraspecific is between the same species. And here you can see that the penguins are all competing for territory. So the first ones that get there get the best territory. And if you don't get there late, you might not get a territory or get a worse territory. Here, these two are actually fighting for mates. So this is sexual selection here. Some examples of intraspecific competition. So if you walk out in the forest, that's competition, right? So they're competing for light and nutrients. So if you're taller, you're going to get more light. You can do more photosynthesis. If your roots are deeper or more expansive, you can get more nutrients. So there's light competition for growth. Plants grow tall for light competition, and plants grow more roots for nutrient competition. There's animals competing for territory, and the big one here was going to be sexual selection, and that is male-male competition. So I have a couple videos here. I'm actually not going to show the videos here, but this is a giraffe neck fighting. So they think that giraffes actually have long necks because they fight for mates. So the males actually fight for mates. Bisons fight for mates. Here it shows you a damselfly too. These two are in this video. So that's male-male competition, and that is between the same species, which makes it intraspecific. And then you have female mate choice, and so I'll go over that. So this is male-male competition, and it happens in insects, it happens in mammals, it happens in invertebrates, it happens in all kinds of things, right? So these males are actually fighting, and the one that wins will get the mate or mates. So this is female mate choice. So females often prefer to mate with the most flamboyant male or the fanciest male because the female sees that as having good genes. And they actually did an experiment where they took some of the feathers away from the males, and then the females actually didn't choose them. So it's pretty well documented that the females actually choose fancy males. And so you see male ornamentation. So that has caused males to become more fancy through natural selection. So here's a pheasant. This is a male and a female. This is a male moose. This is a female moose. This is a male beta and a female beta, right? So he also has his mane. This is the male and female mandrill. And these are lizards. So these are all male lizards, and each of these dewlaps is actually a different species. And this is how the females will choose their male by the color of the dewlap. So these are males. And these are birds of paradise, and these are from Papua New Guinea. I think there's 42 different species. I think there might be actually more than that now. But they're all really weird. And these are all males because these are fancy, or they do something fancy, like call or dance or do something. And these are actually from Papua New Guinea, which is off the coast of Australia. And this is the only place these birds are found. And these are the bowerbirds. So the bowerbirds actually, I would make sure you watch this video. These are all links, so you can watch all these links. So these are the bowerbirds, and birds will make this bower, and then when they're ready to dance, they will actually stand in the bower. The female will stand in the bower, and then the male will do this dance. So here's another bower that the male made, and then he decorated it with blue flower petals. So these are bowerbirds that actually aren't as fancy, but a small male bird actually made this. So he made the bower, and then he decorated it all. And he did that so females will choose to mate with him. Here's another one. The male actually made this bower, and then he decorated. So this is one male bird that made this bower, and he's trying to attract a female. So the reason why females get to choose is actually because they're the limiting sex. So if you think about humans, males could father babies every day, multiple times a day. But females, it actually takes them 1 month to produce one egg. If you think of so, every time you cycle, you produce one egg. And if she becomes pregnant, then she can't breed for another 9 months. And then if she breastfeeds her baby, she will not come back and cycle, so she won't be able to. She's not receptive for another 6 months or 8 months. So she'll be so basically she's not receptive to mate again for a couple of years. So that is why she's the limiting sex, and that's why she gets to choose. And these are all some videos too. So this is the lyrebird. He can actually copy. Lightning bugs are actually sexual selection. So the male bugs, that varies in species. But this is a video actually in the Smoky Mountains, where people go and see these synchronous lightning bugs, and they all light at once. But these are the males. The females actually stay on the bottom. So when you see a lightning bug light, he's actually looking for a mate. That is sexual selection. These are loons. They make really weird calls if you hear the loons. If you go at night and hear frogs chirping, that is sexual selection. So females are assessing them by the way they call, and then they will find the mate and breed with her. So this is interspecific competition. So this is competition between two or more different species. So here you can see there's lots of different species here, and they're competing for light here. I showed you this picture before. This hyena and the lion are competing for food. And here they're competing for a limiting resource of water. And so competition is actually where your niches overlap, right? So if you're competing for the same resource at the same time, you are in competition. And so what you can do is to reduce your competition is not use that resource, right? And then you're going to partition your resources. So that's the idea. You're narrowing your niche to actually reduce your competition, because competition is expensive. It has a negative cost to you. And so being in direct competition for a long time is not a good idea. It's not a good strategy. And so this is just showing you different types of competition. So this is temperate, right? So this is temperate is seasonal. And so the idea, you have spring, summer, and fall. And generally the spring does not compete with the fall, but the summer does compete with some of the spring and some of the fall, but there's not complete overlap. So seasonality really allows you to partition your resources. So we have spring flowers, we have summer flowers, we have fall flowers, things like that. So the tropics do not have seasons. And so there's a lot more competition goes in the tropics, but there's also a lot more species. So there's a lot more niche partitioning as well here. So in the tropics, it's really hard to be a generalist, which is what this would be. So it's really better to narrow your niche and reduce your competition. And this is just showing you some communities, and they have different ecotypes, but you can see There are species with a wide niche. That could be something like, a coyote or a raccoon. And then you have species with more narrow niches here, right? And here's another example. So here would be a species with a wide niche, and this would be a species with a narrow niche, right? But they're all competing, at some level. So possible outcomes for competition. So no two species can occupy the same niche for an extended period of time. So two things will happen. One species will outcompete the other species, and one species will go extinct. That's called competitive exclusion. And the other one is what I just talked about, is resource partitioning, where you actually are going to narrow your niche and to reduce competition. And this is an example of competitive exclusion. So these are two different species of Paramecium. So here is where this is Aurelia and this is Caudatum. So this is when they're grown by themselves. And you can see they sort of have exponential growth, and then they sort of level out. So this is a logistic growth curve. This is a logistic growth curve. But when you actually grow them together, the Aurelia actually outcompetes the Caudatum, and the Caudatum actually goes extinct. So this is an example of competitive exclusion. So the Aurelia actually outcompetes the Caudatum. Here's another example of these. So you have dark mollusk and light one. So that shows you here. So basically the dark one can live along this whole shore, right? That's his fundamental niche. But his realized niche is only up here. Where this one, the lighter colored one, can only live to here, and that's actually its realized niche. So my question here would be, which one is the best competitor? And the answer here is this one here, the Balanus. And that's because it is excluding the brown one from this part of the niche. Even though it can live here, it is excluded there. And this is basically it can live wherever it can live. This one can't live up here. So that's again an example of a competitive exclusion. All right, so resource partitioning is splitting the niche or partitioning a resource. And here you show that insects eat the same thing. So they're all eating insects and they're all living in the same tree, but they're actually living in different parts of the tree. So they're not directly competing for space or food. So this one eats at the top of the tree. This one eats in the middle of the tree. This one mainly eats at the bottom of the tree. So they have partitioned their resource. And the resource that partitioned here is space or habitat. This is another example of that. So this one only eats at the top of the tree. This one eats in this part of the tree. This one eats here, and this one eats there. So if I ask you which one do you think is the best competitor, what would you say? And you probably should say that this one is the best competitor because he actually gets the whole half of the tree to himself, right? And the rest of them are up here. So he's probably the best competitor. So he gets the biggest slice of the resource. So I'm going to give you some examples of this. So bromeliads are a good example. I have some of these in the classroom usually, but they grow on limbs of trees. So they can grow on the ground, but some species actually grow on limbs of trees. And so they actually don't have their roots in the ground. But they can actually, this makes them closer to the light, right? So they can get closer to the light and they're not going to compete with the other species on the ground. But the question is, how do they get water and resources? And they actually have these little cups in them, and that collects water and minerals and things like that. And that's how the plant actually gets its water and nutrients. But they actually have partitioned their resources because they don't no longer compete with the plants on the ground. They've actually lived now in the canopy, and they have this adaptation to make up for not having roots in the ground. And that's just showing you there. So these are videos. These are all videos you can watch. There's some bromeliads. That's some bromeliads. This is not very good, but this is just showing you that worm size. So they actually, these three birds, bluebirds, robins, and blackbirds, have actually partitioned their resource by worm size. So the bluebirds eat small, the blackbirds eat big, and right here, right, is where this right here is where they all compete, right? So in this area here is where the blackbirds and the robins compete. And this area here is where the bluebirds and the robins compete. So what resources can be partitioned? Lots of different resources. You can partition light, like in the forest canopy, food, space, and I'll go over these a little bit. So what resources are being partitioned here? So this is roots, right? So this is in a grassland, and actually in a grassland, 2/3 of the biomass is underground. So if you're looking at a grassland, basically it is root competition. So some of them grow long tap roots, some of them grow more fibrous roots. And so this is where most of the competition is for water and nutrients, because it's too dry for trees to grow there. And this is an HHMI we did in class, and I'll just show you this, but we're not going to actually do this year. So it's between the zebra, the wildebeest, and the Thompson's gazelle. And these both are ruminants, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which means they don't have bottom teeth, and they actually have multiple stomachs, and they can eat dead grass and get nutrients from dead grass. But this is the resource partitioning, right? So this is months after peak rain, and it's really talking about one grass. I can't remember what this grass is called. Anyways, it's a native grass. So after peak rain, they have dry season and a wet season. So this is right after the rains. The grass is really tall, and the zebra is going to come in and eat that tall grass. And then after they eat the grass down, they're going to leave and they're going to migrate away. And then the Thompson's gazelle is going to come in and eat the medium grass. And then this guy is going to come in and eat the smaller grass. So they're actually partitioning the time that they are eating, the time of year that they're eating, and also the height of the grass that they're eating. They're eating the same resource, though. That's the same species of grass. I'll skip over all this. So we'll do predator-prey relationships. So predator eats prey, and an herbivore is something that eats plants. So an herbivore is considered a predator, but they eat plants. And then parasitism is predators that live on or in a host and depend on the host for nutrition. So we'll cover all three of those. So we already covered this. So this is the idea that predator and prey populations oscillate. And we already talked about like the hare being an R strategy. So he experiences much more exponential growth. And then the lynx is a K strategy. So his population doesn't go nearly as high, but it does oscillate with the rabbit. So if there's more rabbits, there's more rabbits for the lynx to eat, and then he can have more offspring, but it takes him longer to do that, which is why it's lagged, why their populations are lagged behind here a little bit. And predator-prey actually, so this is coevolution. So basically, the predator evolves to be a better predator, and the prey evolves to be a better prey. And natural selection is always favoring new traits that promote their survival. So if it's better to be faster, then natural selection will select for that. If there's natural selection to be a certain color to blend in to your environment, natural selection will select for that. If it's better to have better eyesight, then natural selection will select for that. And so that's the idea that the predator and prey are constantly evolving, and that's actually the Red Queen hypothesis, which actually comes from Alice in Wonderland. Don't ask me why. But it says, I think this is, okay, I'll skip to this one. The Red Queen has to run faster and faster in order to keep still where she is. That is exactly what you all are doing. So the idea is that you have to keep evolving to stay in place. If you stop evolving, you're going to get eaten and die. So you have to constantly keep evolving to actually stay in the same place. That's the idea. That's the Red Queen hypothesis. So if you stop evolving, you're going to die. So these are parasites and pathogens. So a parasite derives nourishment from a host, which is harmed in the process. And endoparasites live inside the host, and ectoparasites live on the surface of the host. So parasitoidism is a special type of parasitism where the parasite eventually kills the host, like the coronavirus. Pathogens are disease-causing organisms that can be considered predators. So the biggest predator we're dealing with now is the coronavirus, and it will kill you. So these are some examples of parasitism. So, and you can watch these videos, they're kind of gross. But this is a tick, so it's sucking blood, but it can also carry diseases like Lyme disease and things like that. This is a tapeworm. These are fleas. Mosquitoes carry all kinds of only female pregnant mosquitoes actually bite you, but they carry all kinds of diseases like malaria and I can't think of the other diseases. So, and this is a vampire lamprey where it actually sticks onto you, kills the fish. And this is the tapeworm. So the tapeworm actually, so the eggs or segments are actually ingested by pigs and humans. And then it penetrates the intestine wall, grows in the intestine wall, and it gets into the muscles, and then you eat that muscle. So you should actually not eat. All your meat should be well cooked. And then the tapeworm finds its way into your digestive tract, and then you poop it out, and it cycles around like that. But this is what a tapeworm can look like. All right, so we're going to do a little bit with mutualism. So the most obvious thing I think people think of mutualism is flowers and insects. So it's mutualism because bees get something to eat, like they get nectar, and they also eat the pollen, which is high in protein, and the flowers get pollinated. So honeybees are actually native to East Africa. They're not actually native to North America, but they're here. And it's a female monarchy where females are dominant. And actually, so the honeybees are in trouble for various reasons. Most of the thing is spraying. So people spray their crops with pesticides, which kill the bees. And so, but 2/3 of the plants in the world are pollinated by insects. So 1 in 3 bites of food actually are dependent on pollinators. And there's a good movie that says, if pollinators leave, what would your grocery store look like? And it looks a lot more bare than it is now, particularly the produce section. But, coffee is insect pollinated, chocolate's insect pollinated, most fruits, tomatoes, squashes, watermelons, most of the trees are pollinated. All the fruits on the trees are pollinated by pollinators. So they can be solitary or live in hives. And I actually have a bee barn in the pollinator garden that is actually for solitary bees. So I was told by a PhD student at U of L that actually solitary bees do not sting either. So I haven't tested it out, but there are obviously different ways to actually raise honey. This is what most of you are probably familiar with, but there's other ways to raise honey as well. So this is nutritional mutualism. And so here lichens grow on trees, and lichen is actually a mutualism between an algae and a fungus. This is mutualism because here the birds are eating off the insects and ticks of the rhino. So the rhino's getting cleaned, and then the birds are getting something to eat. So here is Nemo, right? So he gains protection from the sea anemone. He is actually immune to the anemone stings. And then the anemone gets something to eat because of his poop and his droppings and things like that. So those are 2 examples of nutritional. Another example would be termites. So termites can only eat wood if they have this protozoa in their guts. So if they do not have protozoa in their guts, they cannot eat wood. And so that is also a mutualism. So the termites get food from the protozoa. So and then the protozoa gets actually the wood from the termites. So and then it gets something to eat, and then it processes it, and then the termites can actually eat what the protozoa processes. So that is a mutualism. And I already told you about this. So this is lichen, which is kind of a weird picture. All right. So vast amounts of organisms like bacteria live in an animal's digestive tract, including yours. So ruminants, these are ruminants, and they have multiple stomachs, and they can actually chew their cud. So if you go to the state fair and you see a cow sitting there chewing its cud, it actually chews its cud, it takes it down. The bacteria kind of grind it up a little bit, it brings it back up, it chews it some more, and it might do that several times. But every time it does that, it is actually getting more nutrients out of the food or grass. And I would definitely recommend you watch this video over here. So this is on human gut bacteria and why it's important, why we should not take all these antibiotics, and that actually destroys your gut bacteria. So your human gut bacteria is actually really important for your immune system, and keeping you healthy, digesting your food, all kinds of things your human gut bacteria is good for. So if you do take antibiotics, you should actually take a probiotic to keep your gut bacteria sort of more balanced. But these are all examples of ruminants, right? So these are the animals, and there's lots more, but these are all up here too. But your gut bacteria is also here. You've thousands and thousands of different gut bacteria, and everybody has sort of different gut bacteria. So anyways, there's a long story that can go with that, but I'm not going to go into all of it here. I would definitely watch this video here. I would highly recommend you watch that video. This should show up. This could show up on the test. So I'll just tell you another example is when babies are born, like C-sections. So we do a lot of C-sections now, and they know that actually when the baby comes through the vaginal canal, that is when the baby gets the bacteria that actually keeps it healthy and sort of gets it going. And so if you have a C-section, it doesn't get pushed through there, and it never gets inoculated with all that good bacteria from the mother. So what they are now doing is they call it their vaginal baptism. And so they'll actually take the secretions from the mother's vagina and actually put it on the baby and sort of coat the baby with that, to actually coat the baby with the good bacteria. I think, they say more kids have asthma. There's all kinds of diseases that are associated with not babies being born naturally. All right, the next thing we'll do is commensalism. And commensalism is when one species benefits and the other one is not harmed. So a bird's nest is a perfect example of that. So this masked weaver, so the bird, this is a weaver because it looks like he weaves his nest. He's making this his nest in the tree. So the tree is not affected, but the bird benefits. So that's a +0, right? So the bird is the plus and the tree is the 0. And these are all examples of commensalism. So a bromeliad living on the branch, right? So the bromeliad benefits, but the tree really isn't affected. Here, these birds are following the elephant around, and he's gonna scare up insects, and they can eat stuff out of his poop. So the birds benefit, but the elephant is not really affected. Here, the idea is that the barnacles live on the whale, and they get a place to stay, and they get a ride through the ocean and get to eat. So the barnacles benefit, but the whale is not really affected. Here is an Atlantic puffin. He is benefiting from this rabbit hole that has been abandoned. I'm going to skip that one. And this is a really good video on symbiosis. I would recommend you watch that. And so this is also considered coevolution, right? So insects actually evolved way before flowers, but the idea that the insects couldn't pollinate flowers until flowers evolved, right? So the insects actually evolved to be pollinators of flowers, but the insects were around a lot longer than that before. But again, there's coevolution in all of this stuff. So I would also say the coronavirus would be down here. So that's parasite and host, right? So the coronavirus used to not be able to live in humans, but now it adapted and it mutated, and now it can live in humans. And so now it's in our court to become a better prey, right? So we're going to try to get a vaccine, and we're going to try to limit, and we're going to try to kill the virus. That's what we're going to try to do. So that's the idea. And the idea that this is coevolution, this bird has a beak that is uniquely able to get the nectar out of this lobelia flower. So I'll skip over that. All right, so what controls the assembly of a community? You can have bottom-up control, and this is trophic levels, energy pyramids, 10% energy rule, niche partitioning, and then you have top-down control, which are trophic cascades. And I'm going to go over this. I know you all have had this before, so I'm just going to sort of go through this just to review. And if we were in class, I'd have you do something with this, but we're not in class. So the trophic structure of a community is determined by the feeding relationships between organisms. The amount of photosynthesis done determines how much energy there is at the beginning of the food web and determines the number of trophic levels. So this is bottom-up control. So how much you have here determines how many levels you can have here, because eventually you're going to run out of energy. So if you don't, so if you think on the poles, there's not very much photosynthesis goes on, and they only have a few letters. If you go to the tropics, they do a lot of photosynthesis, and you have very complicated and highly elaborate food webs there, because there's a lot more energy at the beginning of the food web. So you have producers, they're autotrophs, they can make their own energy through photosynthesis. And then you have consumers. So you have producers, and they are at the bottom of the food chain. So they could be algae too. And then you have consumers. These are herbivores, and that should be herbivore there. And they eat plants. So here's a tent caterpillar. They eat plants. They live on cherry trees. These are predators, so they eat other animals. These are carnivores, so they eat meat and vegetables. Oh, these are also carnivores, I'm sorry. So the axolotl is actually a carnivore. These are tuna, they're carnivore. These are frogs, they're carnivore. Even though as juveniles, they are herbivores. And these are omnivores. They eat both plants and animals. So those would be a raccoon, a bear. We are omnivores. And then you have decomposers. They break down the organic compounds, and they make them available to plants. So that would be earthworms, roly-polies, fungus, bacteria are all decomposers. And then you have scavengers. They feed on carrion and dead animals. So example here would be crows. These are turkey buzzards. Lots of invertebrates do that, like lobsters and shrimp and crabs. And this is a hyena cleaning up after something else ate it. So we'll talk about trophic levels here. And basically, it's a transfer of energy and matter in an ecosystem. And again, so energy is going to move this way, right? So this is where the energy gets fixed using sunlight and water. It's going to make sugar. And then it's going to move up this way, right? So you have primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. And these are primary consumers. They eat plants, they're herbivores. This is a monarch caterpillar. So there's lots of different herbivores. These are secondary consumers, and they are small carnivores, usually prey animals, like a frog or a sea urchin or a small fish or a worm here. So, well, these are the carnivores here. So they're eating the herbivores, right? So these are eating the herbivores. The sea urchin actually eats the kelp. So these are the small carnivores here: the frog, the otter, the seal, and the bird. And then these are the tertiary consumers. These actually eat the secondary consumers. So here you have a snake eating a frog, and here you have the killer whale eating the seal, and here you have the fox eating the bird. The fox will also eat eggs and things like that. So, and then this is the energy pyramid, right? So you have the producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary. And in the tropics, these would have a quaternary and higher up. So it depends on what system you're in, how many levels you have, and that is determined by how much energy you have at this level. And so this is another example. So here you have grass, and then the mouse is the herbivore, the primary consumer. He eats the grass. And then the snake is the carnivore. He's the secondary consumer, and he eats the mouse. And then the hawk is the tertiary consumer, and he's a carnivore, and he also eats the snake. But all of these actually feed into the decomposer, right? So plant roots die, they get decomposed. The mouse poops and he dies, and that goes to decomposers. The snake poops and he dies, that goes to decomposers. And the hawk poops and he dies, and that also goes to the decomposer. And that decomposer generally feeds back into the producer. So the 10% rule is the idea only 10% of the energy actually gets transferred from one to the other. And I think this is important when you do one of your HHMI things that I assigned you this week. So basically, we'll just start here. So the producers, through photosynthesis, they have accumulated 10,000 kcals of energy. So only 10% of that energy actually gets transferred up to here, right? So 10% of 10,000 is 1,000. You're going to actually just take off a zero, is 10%. And so that gets fixed into this grasshopper here. But the grasshopper will have more energy than that, but that's how much energy is going to get stored into his body and will be available to this mouse up here. And the reason why he only 10% gets stored is because he has to jump around, he has to eat, he has to reproduce, he has to avoid predators, he has to find things to eat. So he expends, he doesn't use all this energy, but he expends most of his energy. Only 10% of that energy gets stored in his body as protein or sugar or something like that. And then at this level, the same thing's going to happen. The mouse is going to eat the grasshopper, but only 10% of the energy that was in the grasshopper is going to get stored into the mouse. And again, the mouse has to run around, he has to eat, he has to reproduce, he has to avoid predators, he has to find a place to live, he has to do all that. So most of that energy gets spent on that, and only 10% gets stored into the mouse. And then the same thing happens here. So here there's only 10 kcals. So you could have one more here, you could have 1 kcal, you could have one more level here, but after that you're going to run out of energy, right? So that's the idea. So the 10% rule really determines how many levels you can have. And then once you run out of energy here, you cannot have any more levels. That's the idea. And here's a video up here if you want to watch it. That's rule of 10. So this is a food chain, which is a simple model. So it's just a single chain. And this would be a food chain. We're not going to go over this. And a food web actually shows all possible relationships. So this is a network. So the idea, this is a food chain, one energy pathway, and this is a food web, which is all the energy pathways. And we did something with this in class. We're not going to be able to do it here, but I'll just show you some examples of some food webs. This is an Antarctic food web. This is a desert food web. And this is a temperate food web. I'm not going to go over all these. I'm going to give you this so you can look at these at your own leisure. This is a soil food web. The soil is the new horizon here. A lot of people study soil now. All right, so this is bottom-up control, right? So and actually the energy that it makes is actually glucose, right? And this is fructose. I don't know why I put this here. It was probably for something else. All right, so we did bottom-up control. The last thing we're going to do is top-down control. And this is going to be keystone species and trophic cascades. So keystone species is kind of an older term and people don't generally use it as much. This trophic cascades is a better term to use. And so a keystone species is a species whose presence in the community exerts a significant influence on the structure of that community. So I think there's two, there's at least one assignment in this week that actually deals with this trophic cascades. There might be two. I think there is two. So, and I'm not going to show you this. This is a good video here. But this is the idea of wolves in Yellowstone National Park. So the wolves were all killed in basically out west. And when you kill the wolves, all the herbivores can come around the rivers, and they basically kill all the riparian zone off. And this is the riparian zone here. So this is a healthy riparian zone, right? And this is an unhealthy riparian zone. So here you have all the stream bank erosion, and that gets into the, when you get a big flooding event, all that water washes into the river. It makes the flower muddy. It kills the moth. It's not good for the fish. It's not good for the invertebrates. So this is not actually a good condition. This is a much better condition to have. But when you don't have wolves, the herbivores come down and they eat all of this away. And then you get things like this. So it actually affects the river. So that's what was happening. And all the stream banks were getting eroded in Yellowstone and things like that. So in 1975, they reintroduced the wolves. And they actually found that they increased biodiversity, which is kind of what you would think would be opposite. But the main thing they did was they stopped the herbivores from hanging around the riparian zone. So eventually the riparian zone went from this to this. And when you have this, you have birds. When you have this, you have rodents. When you have this, you have, right? So here this is producing a lot more energy than this down here. And so here you can start replacing your trophic levels, right? So now you can have insects, you can have birds, you can have, bears, you can have fox and all kinds of other stuff here. But also it restores the river, right? And the idea here is the wolves of Yellowstone actually restored the rivers. That's sort of what the video is about. So this is whales on the food chain. So they think whales are actually help the ocean and actually help climate change because the whales go down deep into the ocean and they eat, but they actually poop up here. So they poop at the surface and they make this phytoplankton, and the phytoplankton eats their poop. But the phytoplankton actually has to have CO2 to do photosynthesis, right? And then it actually reduces oxygen. So they feel like whales are really important for bringing nutrients to the surface and allowing this phytoplankton, and then other things can eat the phytoplankton as well. So this also restores trophic levels in the ocean. The open ocean is pretty barren. So this is a video that shows you that. This is beaver dam building, right? So if the beavers build a dam, they actually create habitat for all these other animals. There's another video. So this is actually going to be in the video, or this is an assignment, an HHMI assignment. And this is about the California sea otter, which is an endangered species, and it actually eats the sea urchins, and they live in the kelp beds. So if the sea otter isn't there, the sea urchin will eat all of the kelp, and then the kelp forest is gone. So it's kind of like a temperate deciduous forest. If you cut down all the trees, the forest is gone and nothing can live there. So it's the same thing there. So the sea otters actually maintain the kelp forest. That's the idea. And there's a little bit more to that. But yeah, so that's top-down control. And this is just sort of showing you here. So this is the sea otter, and this is sort of how it floats down. But it really, the kelps is what really where you get all the energy from. Kelps are actually algae, but they do photosynthesis, right? So this is a kelp forest, and this is the producers of the main producers of this system. And so I think this is also an HHMI. We'd have done this in class, but we're not going to do it. We're not in class, so we're not going to do it. But this is an HHMI. I did give you this. And this video is also on that HHMI. And I did want to show you this. This is the graph that goes with that. So this is really showing you how things can be flipped. So here, a small arrow means it has a small effect. A big arrow means it has a big effect, right? So this is a system where you have kelp, you have sea urchin, and you have sea otters. So the sea otters will have a big effect, a big arrow on the sea urchin. And if they eat all the sea urchin will have a small effect on the kelp, and then the kelp will survive. So here the kelp forest survives. So here you have an introduction of the killer whale, and the killer whale is going to eat the sea urchin. Eat the sea otter. So it's going to have a big effect on the sea otter. So if it eats all the sea otters, or most of the sea otters can no longer eat the sea urchin, so it's going to have a small effect. And then the sea urchin is going to grow, and then the sea urchin is going to have a big effect on the kelp forest. So here you don't have a kelp forest. Here you have a kelp forest. Here you don't have a kelp forest. So by adding an apex predator to the system, you've actually flipped the system, right? So this went from a big arrow to a small arrow. This went from a small arrow to a big arrow. But the thing is, you no longer have the kelp forest here. That's the idea. And these graphs sort of show that. And this is also one. So this is asking you, this is leaf area per plant, right? So this is really how much plant there is. So this plant is getting eaten more than this plant. That's the idea. And so with the beetle, the plant gets eaten more. Without the beetle, the plant gets eaten less. And that's basically what you have to know about that graph. And then you can answer those questions. So I think that's it for this chapter. So I will give you a study guide for this, and I'll probably have questions using Pear Deck for this on Thursday, I believe, or Wednesday. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. So that's it for chapter 19.